Tonia and I are going to be talking about planning to achieve our goals, specifically performance-based and strategic planning, TxDOT's strategic plan and performance measures. We'll finish up with some areas of maturity as it pertains to our overall planning. Since the end, let me get my, oh, there it is. There we go. Since the end of last legislative session, there's been an emphasis, namely through House Bill 20, on performance-based planning and programming within TxDOT. Performance-based planning is the application of performance management through our planning and programming processes to achieve desired outcomes. Performance-based planning is also not done solo or by one individual or one group. It's done in a collaborative manner, both internal and external, including the public as far as TxDOT is concerned in various forms. For TxDOT, it ensures that the transportation investment decisions that are made, both in long-term planning and short-term programming, of projects are based on their ability to meet established goals.
You're going to see this chart often throughout the session this morning. This is the planning process, and it's not necessarily the transportation planning process. It is the process one should use when one is doing any form of planning. And so I'm just going to go over this for you so you can see when you apply your own planning process to whatever it is you're doing, whether it's a big thing like the long-range plan or a small thing like a project or program that you're responsible for, you want to make sure that you go through all these steps so that you have a comprehensive plan, and that's one that can be as effective as possible. So the first thing is that you have to make sure that you focus on your strategic direction. Where is it that you want to go? What do you want to achieve? This is where you determine your desired outcomes for whatever it is you're planning. If you don't know where you're going to go, then any road will take you there. And so you may end up someplace you don't intend if you don't make your intentions clear from the get-go. So that's the purpose of strategic direction, which is what a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But even in the plans that we're going to discuss, all of these steps are important. The next thing you need to look at is planning analysis. What factors shape your plan and your ability to accomplish your desired outcome? You need to be aware of the environment that you're operating in, that you will be operating in, so that your plan is realistic and that you can actually achieve what you want to achieve. If you're not aware of the environment, then you'll be surprised and you may be blindsided and you may fail in your achievement of your plan. Next is programming. So that's where you put your action plan together. How do you allocate resources, time, money, personnel, to implement and achieve your goals? What specific actions will be necessary to result in your desired outcome? Given the planning environment that you're aware of, how can you make sure that you have what you need to implement and to achieve your desired outcome? Implementation and evaluation is where you actually perform to your action plan. You evaluate and measure your progress along the way, make adjustments when necessary, keeping your desired outcome in mind. This is where the rubber hits the road, where you actually are doing your plan, working your plan, as they say. And you also need to make adjustments. If suddenly your environment changes, you may need to adjust your resources so that you can continue to work toward your desired outcome. You also may need to adjust your desired outcome if the resources have shifted, and you may want to minimize or reduce your desired outcome, or if you have new resources that suddenly became available, how are you going to be flexible enough so that you can continue to achieve your desired results? And then at the end of the project, you have to take an assessment of what you have learned from the process. Feed that information back into the planning process for the next cycle of effort, for the next plan, the next program, the next whatever it is that you're planning on, whether you're building your house or implementing the transportation plan. You need to learn from what you worked on. That means that you have to take measurements of what you're doing, and we're going to spend some time talking about measures. So some key considerations when you're planning is being aware of how what you're doing fits in with other plans and programs. So in TxDOT, we have a lot of plans, we have a lot of programs. We can get very siloed if we don't pay attention to how what we're doing affects what else is going on in the department and in transportation. We also need to communicate both internally to the department with your team, with the other parts of the department or whatever group you're working in, as well as our external stakeholders. They need to know what our desired outcome is. Why are we working on this? What's the benefit to them? And then our own team needs to know the same thing. If they don't know why we're working on this, then we're not going to have success. Same thing with making sure that we're coordinating with the other plants. If we don't communicate what it is we're doing and why we're doing it and what resources we need, then we're not likely to have success, and we may negatively affect some of those other plants that are happening. We also need to be accountable to those strategic objectives that we set early on, and we have to be accountable to our customers. So Stacey and I are going to talk about some ways that TxDOT is trying to become more accountable and show its accountability in a transparent manner, both internally and externally. You also need to report your progress. Don't keep what you're doing a secret. Share your successes, but learn from your failures as well. Celebrate when you achieve your goals, but also don't be afraid to learn from failures. Just because you might have a red mark next to your progress report doesn't mean there's not something there that you can learn from so that you can improve your planning process.
As Tonia mentioned, the strategic direction is a key component to the planning process. In early 2015, a conversation started between administration and the commission about producing a dashboard for the commission to review the performance of the agency. At the time, both the commission and administration felt that it would be prudent for the agency to conduct a review of the department's strategic direction, or values, vision, mission, goals, to ensure that they are up to date and in alignment with the state's purpose of TxDOT. In June of 2015, a group of 10 emerging leaders, called the Core Strategy Team, were brought together to evaluate and, if necessary, rewrite the strategic direction of the agency. This group was championed by Commissioner Vandegrift and led by the department's Director of Strategy and Innovation. It was very important over the next 6 months for the Core Strategy Team and leadership to get input from the department staff. There were 5 internal focus groups conducted, including 16 districts and 25 divisions. A total of about 60 employees personally participated in this process. We also conducted a department-wide survey that was conducted towards the end of the focus groups, all of which gathered information around values, who the customers of the department are, what services the department provides, what the future of transportation looks like, and what does success look like for TxDOT. During the next 6 months, the Core Strategy Team took the input received from the focus groups and the department-wide survey into consideration when discussing the values, vision, mission, goals, and objectives of the department. Through a lot of careful consideration, thoughtful debate, and careful phraseology, the Core Strategy Team drafted a proposed set of direction. During this time, the draft set of values, vision, mission, goals, and objectives were also shared with other stakeholders, including the Office of the Governor, HB 20 Planning Organization Stakeholder Committee, which was made up of district engineers and MPOs, the department's communication division. We circled back with the focus group participants, and we also shared it with administration and commission. All of this input with these stakeholders shaped the final proposed set of values, vision, mission, goals, and objectives, which was adopted by the commission February 25th, 2016. Here's the current strategic direction of the Texas Department of Transportation as adopted in February. You guys can read this, right? I have a more complete version up here, which I'll leave on the stage if you all want to look at this during the break. It actually defines the values and the goals, and it identifies the objectives for the seven identified goals that the agency now has.
As Jessica mentioned in my introduction, I'm responsible for coordinating the development of the agency's biennial strategic plan. And we have incorporated the new vision, mission, objectives statement that Stacey just presented in the strategic plan that's currently in effect for fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2021. And what I want to point out is that the strategic plan is required by statute for every state agency every 2 years as part of a performance-based budgeting process. It is focused on helping the agency determine what resources are necessary for it to accomplish its mission, its goals during a 5-year planning period. So it's focused on the agency as an organization. It is not a transportation plan. It is about how TxDOT is going to organize itself to achieve short-term goals in the 5-year window of this particular plan. And as I said, it's focused on the budget, the biennial budget that the legislature adopts for all state agencies for a 2-year period. So it has a 5-year planning horizon. It is determined, the contents of the plan are determined by the governor's office and the legislative budget board. And from time to time, when our governors change the requirements for the content of the strategic plan change, though there are some things that are statutorily required. Some things that are in this year's strategic plan are the strategic direction statements that Stacey just went over, a specific action plan for how we're going to implement or intend to implement those goals over the 5-year period. And what you'll find in that action plan is a list of initiatives that the department intends to undertake in support of those objectives. There's also a new requirement for state agencies to identify redundancies and impediments in statutes, rules, and regulations. The governor is very focused on trying to make government more efficient, and this is where he's asking state agencies to do a self-assessment to identify either their own processes or statutory limitations that keep state agencies from effectively serving the people of Texas. So that might be something interesting for you guys to take a look at, and hopefully the legislature will also take a look at those lists to see whether or not there are ways to make the statute cleaner so that the agencies can operate more effectively. That list of redundancies is also being shared with the Sunset Advisory Commission, which is currently reviewing TxDOT as an agency. So it would be interesting to see whether or not they include some of those possible changes in their sunset report for the agency. Probably the most important part from the performance-based budgeting perspective is that the strategic plan contains the budget structure for the agency. So what are the budgetary categories that will show up in the General Appropriations Act under which the agency's funds will be allocated for the 2-year biennium. And each budget structure component ideally has a set of performance measures that will help the legislature see how the allocation of resources to that budget structure item results in performance for the agency. And so I handed out a list of performance measures I had 50 copies, so if you got one of those, that's a listing of the current fiscal year 16 performance measures that we have in our budget structure. And you'll see when you look at that form that it's organized by budget structure item. For example, provide transportation planning is one budget structure where funds are allocated to the department. Transportation improvements is the next budget structure item. Preserving the transportation system is the third. Optimizing services and systems and enhancing rail transportation. Each of those gets an allocation of funds, and those measures are intended to help determine the effect of that investment by the agency. And we'll spend a little bit more time on those in a minute. The other things that are in the strategic plan help determine whether or not the department is focusing on the appropriate application of its resources. So the historically underutilized business plan is included by all agencies, which is very important for contracting and the goals of the state to provide more opportunities for those businesses. The statewide capital plan is where we identify how we're going to improve our facilities and our information technology. Our workforce plan talks about how we're going to use our most important resource, our human resources, to develop the talent and the skills that we need so that as an agency our staff can perform and fulfill its mission. We also have to report on our customer service. How do the people outside of the department perceive TxDOT when we perform service to them in a business environment? And then we also include an assessment of advisory committees. Are those being effective in providing good advice and counsel to the department's leadership or to a particular program. Do they need to be continued? Again, it's another efficiency analysis. TxDOT staff develops the strategic plan. We present it to the commission and they adopt it by minute order, and then it is posted on the TxDOT website. So if you would like to delve into what's in the strategic plan, it is posted on the TxDOT website, and you can search for a strategic plan, or you can click on the Inside TxDOT section, and you'll see a link for the strategic plan. Again, we'll be going through this process 2 years from now, because it's every 2 years you do a 5-year plan, and it's focused on the agency as an organization. Okay, so next thing we want to talk about is performance metrics. We have, as I stated, a list of budgetary performance measures. Some of them are operational to show effectiveness of the department's processes, particularly in the area of how we award our projects and our grants. So for example, the number of construction project preliminary engineering plans completed, or the number of grants approved for airports, or the number of highway lane miles resurfaced by state forces. Those are operational to help the agency determine how effective we are allocating our resources. The most significant of these measures from a public perspective, and I think for the department and achievement of its mission, are those system performance measures that indicate the effect, even though it's indirect, of the primary budgetary allocations of the agency. Some of those include the percent of bridges rated in good condition or higher. That's a system level performance measure. Percent of highway pavements in good or better condition. And then the percent of 2-lane highways with 26 feet or wider in paved width. That's a safety issue, but it's also a condition issue. So those are important for us to know whether or not we're putting our resources to achieve a desired outcome. So for example, on the percent of bridges rated in good condition or higher, we're trying to continually improve the number of bridges that are in that condition so that we can spend less time on replacing them and more time on maintaining them, because that's more cost effective. The system performance measures that I just outlined, plus others, are going to be presented on the commission dashboard, which Stacey's going to talk about. We also have some federal requirements that will be coming down with regard to performance measures at the statewide level. We'll be coordinating with the MPOs in the state for regional level performance reporting at the federal level. Those are going to be reported to the Federal Highway Administration and to the Federal Transit Administration. Those measures and processes for reporting are still being finalized, but we will be coordinating closely with our MPO partners in our target setting and in our reporting requirements. So stay tuned for that. So what's most important about the system performance measures is that they help the department determine how well our application of resources to strategic priorities is working toward achieving our desired outcomes for the transportation system. And Stacey's going to talk a little bit more about some of the other types of measures that we have.
Real quick, the next set of measures on here that we're going to touch on just briefly is project selection and prioritization measures. These will be discussed in greater detail at a later presentation by Michelle Conkle. These measures are a more granular consideration of project readiness and the direct impact each individual project has on system performance in the project's specific geographic location. These directly impact funding allocation decisions, or discussions and decisions. The last set of measures on their TxDOT operational measures are new measures that the agency is currently developing. We've got draft measures, and the idea will be to report them from a high-level statewide perspective to the commission, which will be made public, as well as a more granular dashboard that will be reported to administration. These measures are indicators of previous performance and will be focused on helping to identify the effectiveness of TxDOT processes, plans, and policies. There is a lot of overlap between all three of these circles, and so it's important to know that there's an effort to make sure that all of these measures are coordinated in definition so that when reported, they're saying the same thing, they're delivering the same message.
The last thing we wanted to point out is that in the planning process within TxDOT, at least for the strategic planning items that we're discussing, but I would suggest in a lot of other places where we have plans, we have some maturity that we still need to work on. The first thing is that we are great at setting our vision, mission, and goals and strategies. We aren't so necessarily great at following through on our action plans. So that's an area where the department will need to step up in terms of putting actual action items down and then holding ourselves accountable to following those action plans and then measuring whether or not we achieved our desired outcome with that action. So that's an area of growth. And we have to be accountable not only to our action plan, but to the people that we work for, the commission, the administration, the people of Texas, the legislature. So we have to set up processes so that we can let everyone know what it is that we're planning, what our desired outcomes are, how they can track to see whether or not we are actually accountable to what we said. We have to have internal processes that make accountability very important, and we have to have external ways to show our accountability. We also need to keep in mind, as I said before, that what one plan is doing is going to affect another plan. So you're going to hear from a lot of people today about the plans that we have for the transportation program and implementing them. They're all related, and we need to make sure that we have coordination among plans so that we don't, one, misuse resources, or two, miss out on an opportunity to serve the people of Texas as effectively as possible. That all requires communication. We have to communicate internally, but we also have to communicate externally to our stakeholders. There's lots of ways that we can do that in the planning process, making sure that they have a seat at the table when we set our objectives, as we define our resources and let them know that we're going to come up short in our resources, or whatever it is. And then in the implementation, we need to stay communicating all the time, internally and externally, about that. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is through the establishment of these dashboards that Stacey mentioned. Outward-facing dashboards to let people know what the performance is, but also you can't just post a number. You have to talk about what the number means. How are we going to learn from what that result is and, again, feed it back into the planning process so that we are continuously improving. So that's all that we had to present to you. We just wanted to give you a sort of a planning 101, get you thinking about the application of strategic planning and what you do, and also what the department does, and let you know that there are still areas of development where the department is going to work to continuously improve its planning processes. And we're available to answer any questions if anybody has any.
If you look at the sheet that you handed out, I mean, if you look at the number of projects awarded, you greatly exceeded your goal, and you got a green on that. I think you were $1 billion, probably over what you planned on. But when you look down at percent complete, you know, that's red, and you didn't achieve the goal. I mean, those two are somewhat linked. You know, you can be superior in one that actually negatively impacts you in the other. How do you deal with the contextual linkage between these goals, I guess, is my question.
Basically, that's a very important point about target setting. Unfortunately, with the budgetary process, that action occurs in the spring of the even-numbered years, 18 months in advance of when you begin to report on those performance measures. So we set targets based on what we anticipate the budget is going to be 2 years from now, essentially. And so in some cases, the targets were set higher based on a larger amount of money might come forward, that sort of thing. The other thing is that sometimes the results are affected by, in the case of construction, if a lot of high-dollar projects come in, then that's going to affect your result. So it has a lot of factors, which is why you can't just, unfortunately, just show the green and red. You have to talk about what each of those means and, as you point out, how they relate to each other. So the target setting is important. Unfortunately, the scheduling of when the targets are set and when we're stuck with those targets is something that's a challenge with the budgetary measures. But at the same time, we have to be able to talk about what do those numbers really mean. There has to be a context to the number.